Hello everyone, it's John again. Just wanted to say thank you for the feedback on the first video that I created. I'm sorry I mumbled a lot. I'm hoping the higher quality video and the fact that I'm speaking up a little bit more will alleviate that. And I would try not to trail off too. I think that kind of that causes a problem too. So I know I ended the last video with saying that we would go through and create a fictional budget, but as I was thinking through that a little bit more, I thought, hey, I think there's a few prerequisite items we should probably discuss before we dive right into that. So I have two items. They seem kind of irrelated, but they're both important to cover. Excuse me. Before we dive into creating the budget. So obviously the budget is a plan, and just like remodeling your home, before making the plan, you dream. You dream, what do I want the kitchen to look like? It'd be really nice if Joanna Gaines was here and she just, said, yeah, that goes there, and put this kind of tile here. Like, that's kind of dreaming, and that's what you do before you sit down and you make a plan. And I'm going to encourage each and every one of you, no matter where you're at, I shouldn't say no matter where you're at. If you're, like I talked about in the first video, if you're just trying to cover your four walls, you keep doing that. You're a rock star. Just keep going with that. If your job is somewhat stable for now, but you still have this mountain of debt, you're like, man, I don't know how to attack this. I would definitely encourage a little bit of dreaming. And if you're married, it's even better. You get the two of you can dream together. What is it we want to do? Where do I want to be a year from now? 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And it's kind of a cliche interview question, but it's so powerful. You start asking yourself that, and you're like, man, I really want to. I guess I should probably speak a little bit from experience. So when I was down in Lincoln, I was starting this process. I knew I want to get out of debt, number one, so I don't feel this burden on me. Number two, so I can give and be more generous. And that was a driving factor for me. But I know for a lot of people my age, like traveling is huge. Like, that's a really big motivation. I'm perfectly content with riding my bike around Omaha and Iowa, and of course going through the trails. But a lot of people, that's a really big deal. They want to see the world, and I think that's a great motivation. But again, that's just one. It could be any number of things. So dreaming obviously is really important. But at some point, the dream has to transition to a goal. Otherwise, it's just not going to get done. And not just any kind of goal, but a SMART goal. One that's specific, measurable, attainable, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And that's how my goals were when I was doing this for each account. I had, when I was going through the budget, I'm like, I want it paid off by this date. And I was, more often than not, I hit that target. But sometimes life happens, and it might get pushed back a month, 2 months. But the fact of the matter is you're working towards that. And the other aspect of it is the discipline. And I think we'll probably discuss this a little bit more when we actually create the budget. But I did want to kind of prepare you for that. Discipline in personal finance is just simply executing on your plan. So that means you're probably going to be looking at your budget not a couple times a day, but at least once a day, just to focus in on, okay, where am I at in correlation to all this. Of course, that's not long term, but when you're in the midst of that, you're probably going to end up doing that. And the big thing is to know your why. I shared in my last video when I worked at FedEx and I was getting up at 3:30 in the morning, I definitely knew my why. I knew, hey, I want to get out of debt so I don't feel this burden. I want to be able to be generous one day. I'm willing to sacrifice sleep. I'm willing to be uncomfortable. I'm willing to do whatever for a period of time, just so I don't have to deal with this ever again. And when you're willing to, and that's not just myself, that's anybody else that has a really intense goal. You see like these stories of people that have lost an insane amount of weight. I mean, they were hyper focused on what their why was. And yeah. The second thing is I wanted to talk about, and again, it seemed, like I mentioned, it seems kind of irrelated, but it's kind of important. And this isn't a Dave Ramsey thing. This is something that I've learned through my journey that I've taught my brothers and they've found useful. I will share it with you and you can determine if it might be useful for you. And that is how I structure my bank accounts. And you might not think that that's a big deal, but it really makes it does help make this process a little bit easier. So as a full disclosure, I do have a bank I work with, I do business with here in town. And I also have another bank that I have two accounts with, one of the major online savings banks in the country. But I do a bulk of my business is with the bank here in town. So I have 3 checking accounts and a savings account. So the first one is my primary checking account. That is where my payroll check comes into. And there's 2 interesting facts about this account. One, and I'll just tell you, I'm okay with it. I intentionally keep the balance of that particular account in and around $100. Now, if you're a family or a couple, you might bump that up a little bit, and I'll explain why I do that. It's like I said, it's intentional. It's a risk management strategy. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, think about this. You hear about data breaches all the time in the United States. It happens a lot. Like, not some of the time, it happens a lot. When you get a checking account and they give you a debit card, your bank gives you a debit card, and you go and swipe that, even if you have the chip card and you're not inserting it, you're doing the swipe thing, that retailer, that merchant is holding on to your card number, expiration date, CCV number. They have all of that. And if they get hacked, the bad guys are going to sell it along with a million others in a large file or a set of files on the dark web. That's what's going to happen. And if you notice any fraudulent activity, you should immediately shut your card, call your bank, shut your card, and they'll issue a new card with a new number. And that is the correct response. But herein lies the problem. Having worked in the banking industry for my entire career, if you've ever went through the process of having to dispute fraudulent charges on your debit card, I've never done it, but again, I've worked in this arena long enough to know what that's like. It's minimum 4 to 6 weeks for most banks. And that's a problem if you're somebody who has a good chunk of money sitting in your checking account and the bad guys hack it, they drain it. Let's say you have $1,000 in there. the bank says, well, we're investigating, it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, they're not going to be able to do anything. They might try to issue you a loan and they're going to charge you interest on it. And so, I don't know, maybe they might cut you a deal on the interest. I don't know. But this is why I do it. You have to assume a certain level of risk when you take your debit card out in public. You have to assume, unfortunately, for the worst. I wish we didn't live in a world where we had to do that, but you do. I typically buy my groceries on there. If I stop at, for a coffee or something like that, I make those kind of purchases there. So if for whatever reason my wallet gets stolen, if the retailer I was using the card at gets hacked, then the bad guys aren't going to get away with that much. And if I have to wait 4 to 6 weeks to get $100 or so back, it's not going to be the end of the world. But again, you have to determine the threshold. That's why I do it. But here's the other thing. I turn off, on the primary checking account, I turn off automatic overdraft protection. A lot of banks will have this in the event, so you don't get an overdraft fee. They'll just pull it directly from your savings account or whatever other account you want, where you probably have a lot of other money. Of course, you don't want to do this if bad guys are using your card and it gets compromised. You eliminate all of that. So I turned it off, and I told the bank, of course, to decline any charge if there's not sufficient funds, decline the charge. And of course, that still requires me to pay attention, and that's ultimately why I do that too. I still have to pay attention to make sure that there's nothing weird going on in that account, because I consider it to be externally facing, unfortunately. The next account, so you might be wondering, okay, John, you have $100 in your primary checking account. Where do you pay your bills out of? That's the next account. It's called accounts payable, and if the name sounds familiar, it is exactly what businesses do. This is exactly how businesses do it. So actually, businesses have an accounts receivable and they have an accounts payable. It doesn't make sense in personal finance for individuals to have an accounts receivable, because you don't have hundreds or thousands of vendors trying to pay you at different intervals. You just don't. It's not appropriate. It doesn't make sense. Accounts payable, that does make sense, because you're going to have multiple creditors that you're going to be owing money to at different intervals throughout the month. So yeah, that makes sense, and I found that to be very helpful. So when I get paid on Friday morning, typically one of the first things I'll do is I will move the funds from according to my budget, because that's what I'm using. I will move those expenses line by line from my primary checking to my accounts payable. I personally don't do the sum of the expenses. I'm old school. I go one by one. Of course, it's a tomato tomato, but it just makes me feel better. The next one is your savings account. That's your emergency fund. If you're getting out of debt, that's $1,000. That's your starter $1,000 emergency fund. If you are out of debt, that's your 6 months worth of expenses. It's pretty straightforward. And the next one is another checking account. It's called what I like to refer to as the float account. The float account. And the best way, I'll describe how I used it, and maybe this will make a little bit of sense. So like I said, on Fridays you pay your bills and put in accounts payable. There really shouldn't be any little, if any, deviation in your emergency fund. So everything else that you can apply towards the debt, that's gonna go in your float account. So when I was working at FedEx, I got paid weekly. So whatever I could whatever I made from my primary job went into the float account, and I actually had my direct deposits in that situation. I had it actually going into the float account because it just stayed there. I didn't touch it. And then at the end of the month, once it's all there, I would apply it towards the debt that I was working on at that time. And that worked out for me. And that does help too. It provides you a little bit of cushion if you need it. But I say that with a caveat. It can promote sloppy budgeting, because you might think, well, yeah, I'm a couple $100 off on my budget. I spent a little bit more in this area. I'll just pull it from my float account. Well, that's what you just did. You just prolonged the amount of time you're in debt, because you're not sticking to the plan. You're not paying attention. Things are going to come up, sure, but if it's really discretionary things, you really got to be on guard to that. So if you think you're disciplined enough to have it sit there until the end of the month, I would say that's ideal. If you really just know, man, that is not me. If it sits there, I'm going to spend it. By all means, once you get your money, just apply it towards your debt. So those are the two things I wanted to talk about really quickly before we dive into creating the budget. Again, I want to thank you for watching my previous video and watching this video, and I hope you find it informative. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to comment below, or feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you about it. Thanks again, guys.